The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers slid open with a soft whisper. Ambassador Kim Dae-ho walked through them for the last time, his black diplomatic case held firmly in his right hand. Behind him followed 3 other humans, their faces calm and unreadable. The council chamber was huge. Hundreds of different alien species sat in curved rows that stretched up toward the crystal dome ceiling. The air hummed with translation devices working in dozens of languages. At the center of it all sat Veltar, the current council chair. His blue skin glowed softly under the chamber lights, and his 4 eyes watched the humans with obvious relief. "Ambassador Kim," Veltar said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's speakers. "Are you ready to proceed with the final signing?" Kim Dae-ho nodded once. "We are ready." Park Mira stepped forward. She was Earth's chief negotiator, a woman who had spent 30 years trying to make humanity fit into galactic society. Today, she carried the documents that would end that effort forever. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore the same blue diplomatic uniform she had worn to her first council meeting 3 decades ago. "The papers are all prepared," she said, placing a thick folder on the central podium. "Earth officially requests withdrawal from the Galactic Council and all associated treaties." A ripple of satisfied murmurs went through the chamber. The crystalline Zephyrians clinked softly, their bodies resonating with pleasure. The gas-based Nethri swirled in their containment suits, their colors shifting to happy yellows and greens. Even the ancient architects, beings made of living stone, seemed to relax their massive forms. Lee Junho, the human military liaison, stepped up to another podium. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke in council sessions, but when he did, others listened. Today he carried a datapad that made several council members shift nervously in their seats. "As a gesture of goodwill," Lee Junho said, "we are providing complete information about all human military installations, ship positions, and defensive systems." He placed the datapad down gently. "We want to make sure our departure causes no confusion or concern." Elder Morgeth of the Architects leaned forward. His voice sounded like grinding stone when he spoke. "This is unexpected generosity. We have no need for secrets anymore," Lee Junho replied simply. The 4th human, Yoon Sora, had remained silent throughout the ceremony. She was Earth's xenobiologist, someone who had spent her career studying the different species in the council. Her job had been to help humans understand their alien neighbors. Now she stood quietly, watching everything with careful eyes. Veltar gestured with 2 of his arms toward the signing table. "If there are no objections, we can complete the process." No one objected. Why would they? For 60 years, humans had been a problem for the council. They asked too many questions. They challenged too many rules. They wanted to change things that had worked fine for thousands of years. Most annoying of all, they refused to accept their place in the galactic order. Other species joined the council and found their role quickly. The Zephyrians became the galaxy's mathematicians and engineers. The Nethri served as communications specialists. The architects built the great space stations and planetary defenses. Every species had a function, a place, a purpose assigned by the council. But humans? Humans wanted to do everything. They studied Zephyrian mathematics and then suggested improvements. They learned Nethri communication methods and then invented new ones. They worked with architect engineering and then designed things the architects called impossible. Worse, they succeeded. Human improvements actually worked. Human inventions actually functioned. Human designs actually got built. It was embarrassing for species that had been doing these jobs for millennia. "The signing will now commence," Veltar announced. Kim Dae-ho approached the table. He picked up the special stylus that could write in any atmospheric condition, on any surface, in any gravity. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the translation devices seemed to pause. He signed his name with careful, precise strokes. Then he stepped back. Park Mira signed next, her signature flowing and confident. Lee Junho signed with the same efficiency he brought to everything else. Finally, Yoon Sora stepped forward and added her name to the document. "It is done," Veltar declared. Humanity is officially withdrawn from galactic society. The Sol system will be marked with interdiction beacons. No council ship will enter human space. No human ship will enter council space. Both sides will have the isolation they desire. Perfect, said Council Member Thekral of the Hegemony. Finally, we can get back to proper governance. The humans gathered their belongings. They moved with the same calm efficiency they had shown throughout the ceremony. No anger, no protests, no last-minute arguments. They simply collected their things and prepared to leave. As they walked toward the chamber doors, Yun Sora paused. She turned around and looked back at the hundreds of assembled aliens. Her expression was impossible to read, but something about it made a few council members uncomfortable. For just a moment it looked like pity. Then she turned and followed the other humans out of the chamber. The doors closed behind them with that same soft whisper. Veltar immediately called for a vote. All in favor of sealing the Sol system with permanent interdiction beacons? Every species voted yes. The vote was unanimous. Motion carried, Veltar announced. The human problem is solved. Celebrations began immediately. Council members who had barely spoken to each other for years suddenly became friendly. The Zephyrians played musical tones that filled the chamber with crystalline harmonies. The Nethri created colorful light displays in their containment suits. Even the normally serious architects allowed themselves small expressions of satisfaction. "We should have done this decades ago," muttered Council Member Yorbat of the Trade Federation. "Agreed," said Elder Finwex of the Science Consortium. They never understood their proper place. Outside the chamber, the four humans walked through the station corridors toward their ship. Other species stepped aside to let them pass, some with obvious relief, others with barely hidden satisfaction. "Do you think they suspect anything?" Park Mira asked quietly. Kim Daeho shook his head. "They see exactly what they want to see. Troublesome. Humans finally giving up and going away." "The data transfer is complete," Lee Junho reported, checking his wrist device. "All their systems now have our full technical specifications." Yun Sora was the last to board their ship. As the airlock sealed behind her, she took one final look at the council station through the porthole. "They have no idea what they just did," she said softly. "They will," Kim Daeho replied. "Eventually." Their ship departed the station without ceremony. Within hours, it had jumped to hyperspace, heading toward the Sol system. Behind them, the council continued its celebrations, confident that they had finally rid themselves of humanity's disruptive influence. The interdiction beacons were installed around the Sol system within a month. They sent out clear warnings in every galactic language. "This system is off limits. Do not approach. Do not enter. Do not interfere." The galaxy settled back into its comfortable routines. Trade flowed along established routes. Technology advanced at its usual steady pace. The various species returned to their assigned roles without the constant irritation of human interference. Everything was exactly as it should be, or so they thought. 50 years had passed since the humans left. The galaxy had grown quiet and predictable in ways that pleased the Council greatly. Trade routes operated like clockwork. Disputes were settled through established procedures. Technology advanced at a reasonable, manageable pace. Most species had forgotten humans ever existed. The younger generations knew them only as a footnote in galactic history, if they knew them at all. The Council preferred it that way. Thalwyn was different. The young Zephyrian scholar spent his days deep in the crystal archives, studying old records that most others found boring. His crystalline body resonated with curiosity as he sifted through decades of forgotten data files. He was looking for information about pre-Council civilizations when he found the human research files. They were buried deep in a subsection marked Extinct Species, Scientific Contributions, and appeared to have been largely overlooked. "Dimensional fold technology," Thalwyn read aloud, his voice creating soft musical tones in the archive chamber. "Quantum consciousness transfer, reality manipulation through mathematical constants." The concept seemed impossible, even by current galactic standards. Thalwyn's people were considered the galaxy's greatest mathematicians, yet these human Equations went beyond anything the Zephyrians had ever imagined. One file caught his attention particularly. It was titled Project Ascension, Final Phase Preparation, and was dated just 3 months before humanity's withdrawal from the Council. Thalwyn tried to open the file, but it was encrypted with security protocols he had never seen before. The mathematical patterns were so complex that looking at them made his crystalline structure ache. Excited by his discovery, Thalwyn brought the files to Elder Morgeth of the Architects. The ancient being examined the data with his usual methodical approach, his stone fingers moving carefully over the display screens. Typical human nonsense, Morgeth concluded after several hours of review. They always believed they could break the fundamental laws of physics. These files are proof of their delusional thinking, nothing more. But Elder, Thalwyn protested, some of these equations actually work. I tested the basic mathematical frameworks and they produce valid results. Valid results that prove nothing, Morgeth replied firmly. The humans were clever, I grant you that. But clever and wise are different things. They left because they finally understood they could never achieve these impossible dreams. Thalwyn was disappointed but accepted the Elder's judgment. He returned the files to the archives and tried to forget about them. But forgetting became difficult when the reports started coming in. At first, they were just strange readings from automated monitoring stations at the galaxy's edge. Ships would disappear from sensors for brief moments, then reappear exactly where they had been with no explanation. Crews reported no awareness of any interruption. Captain Rendai of the exploration vessel Seeker filed the first detailed report. Her ship had been mapping an unexplored system near the galactic rim when something impossible happened. We were conducting a standard survey of the third planet, she reported to Council headquarters. All sensors showed normal readings. Then, for exactly 17 seconds, our instruments detected structures that couldn't exist. What kind of structures? Asked the Council's investigation committee. Massive rings surrounding the system's star, space elevators connecting all the planets, structures that would require engineering capabilities beyond anything we understand. Captain Rendai paused, checking her notes. But when we looked again, everything was normal. Empty space, uninhabited planets, natural stellar formation. Sensor malfunction, the committee concluded immediately. Return to base for equipment inspection. But similar reports kept coming in. Ships throughout the galaxy were detecting brief glimpses of impossible structures, massive engineering projects that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Commander Vextal of the merchant vessel Prosperity reported seeing an entire star system that had been perfectly reorganized. All the planets had been moved into ideal orbits. Asteroid belts had been arranged into geometric patterns, and the star itself seemed to be burning with impossible efficiency. It was beautiful, she reported, like someone had taken a natural system and perfected it. But when we tried to get closer, there was nothing there, just empty space where our sensors had detected the system. The Council's response was always the same: sensor malfunction, equipment failure, crew fatigue. They ordered all such reports to be classified and told ship captains to focus on their assigned duties instead of chasing false readings. But the reports continued to accumulate. More troubling were the navigation errors that were becoming common throughout the galaxy. Ships would jump to hyperspace heading for one destination and arrive somewhere completely different, with no memory of changing course. Navigation Officer, Colwett of the transport ship. Steady Progress filed a particularly disturbing report. His ship had been carrying medical supplies to a colony on the galaxy's outer rim when something unexpected happened. We entered hyperspace normally, he reported. The jump calculations were perfect, checked 3 times. Our destination was the Kevlar system, 72 light-years away. But when we dropped out of hyperspace, we were in the Mintaka system, over 300 light-years from our intended destination. Navigation error, the Council concluded. That's not possible, Colwett insisted. The fuel consumption matched a 72 light-year jump, not 300. Our chronometers showed the correct travel time for the shorter distance, but we were definitely in Mintaka, not Kevlar. Equipment malfunction then. All our equipment checked out perfectly, and here's the strange part. When we jumped back toward Kevlar, we arrived there in exactly the time it should have taken from our original starting point, not from Mintaka. The Council ordered Colwett's ship impounded for comprehensive technical review. The review found nothing wrong with any of the ship's systems. Dr. Kethral, the Council's chief physicist, began to notice patterns in the reports. Ships weren't experiencing random navigation errors. They were being moved along specific routes, as if something was gently guiding galactic traffic in certain directions. She brought her findings to the Council, but they dismissed her concerns. "Ships get lost," they told her. "It happens. There's no need to imagine mysterious forces at work." But Dr. Kethral continued her research. She discovered that the navigation anomalies were creating new trade routes, more efficient paths between systems that reduced travel time and fuel consumption. Whatever was causing the errors seemed to be helping, not harming. More disturbing were the reports from deep space explorers. They spoke of finding star systems that had been improved, planets with perfect atmospheres, asteroid belts arranged into useful patterns, dying stars that had been somehow rejuvenated. Explorer Captain Weylan reported discovering a system where 3 planets had been moved into a perfect configuration for a triple-world civilization. Each planet had been terraformed to support different types of life, connected by massive space elevators that stretched between their orbits. "It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she reported. "A perfect example of stellar engineering. But according to our records, this system contained only gas giants and dead rocks when it was last surveyed 50 years ago." Survey error, the Council ruled. The previous expedition must have made mistakes. But when they checked the old survey records, they found something disturbing. The original survey had been conducted by a human exploration team just 5 years before humanity's withdrawal from the Council. The human survey had recorded exactly what Captain Weylan found: 3 perfectly terraformed planets connected by impossible engineering. But somehow the Council's official records showed something completely different. Someone had been changing the archives. Dr. Kethral began a careful investigation. She discovered that thousands of survey records had been altered over the past 50 years. In every case, the original records had been filed by human teams, and in every case, the alterations made the discoveries seem less remarkable, more ordinary. The pattern was clear. Someone had been systematically hiding evidence of advanced engineering throughout the galaxy. Engineering that had been discovered and documented by human survey teams before their departure. When Dr. Kethral brought this evidence to the Council, they responded with anger rather than curiosity. The humans falsified their records, Elder Morgeth declared. They wanted to make themselves seem more important than they were. These alterations are simply corrections of human lies. But the alterations were made after the humans left, Dr. Kethral protested. Someone has been changing the records for decades. Computer errors, Veltar concluded. Archive corruption. There are perfectly rational explanations for everything. Dr. Kethral was ordered to stop her investigation and focus on real scientific work, instead of chasing conspiracy theories. But late at night, in her private laboratory, she continued studying the data. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that something extraordinary was happening throughout the galaxy, something that had begun exactly 50 years ago, when the humans left the Council quietly and without protest, something that was growing stronger every day. 100 years had passed since humanity's quiet departure, and the galaxy was changing in ways the Council could no longer ignore. What had started as strange sensor readings and navigation errors had become something far more serious. Entire star systems were disappearing, not destroyed by war or consumed by black holes, but simply gone. Where thriving civilizations had existed for thousands of years, there was now empty space. Perfect spherical voids that contained nothing but confused gravitational fields that remembered what used to be there. Dr. Kethral stood before the emergency session of the Council, her data pad filled with reports that made no sense according to everything they thought they knew about physics. "The Kepler sector is gone," she announced to the silent chamber. "All 7 star systems, 43 inhabited planets, 2 billion beings. They vanished 3 days ago." Define gone, Elder Morgoth demanded, his stone face showing the first cracks of worry the council had seen in decades. I mean exactly that. They no longer exist in normal space. Our sensors detect perfect spherical voids where those systems used to be. But the gravitational effects remain, as if the mass is still there but invisible to all our instruments. Veltar's 4 eyes focused intently on the physicist. What could cause such a phenomenon? Nothing in our understanding of science, Dr. Kethrall replied honestly. But I've detected a pattern. The disappearances aren't random. They form a spiral pattern leading toward the galactic core. She activated the chamber's main display screen. A 3-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, with red zones marking the disappeared systems. The pattern was unmistakable, a vast spiral with its center in human space. The spiral leads directly to the Sol system, she continued, which, according to our monitoring stations, no longer exists either. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs. The Sol system had been sealed with interdiction beacons for a century. No one had thought to actually check if it was still there. When did we last receive signals from the interdiction beacons? Veltar asked quietly. Council Security Chief Mordan checked his records. His expression grew troubled as he searched through the data. The beacons went silent 47 years ago. We assumed it was equipment failure and decided not to replace them since no one was supposed to go there anyway. Send a probe immediately, Veltar ordered. I want to know what's happening in human space. Already done, Dr. Kethrall said, grimly. The probe reached the Sol system's coordinates yesterday. It found a perfectly spherical void exactly 2.3 light-years in diameter. But here's the disturbing part. Our instruments detect massive energy readings from within the void. Something is still there, just existing in a way our sensors can barely perceive. She switched to another display showing energy readings that pulsed in complex patterns. These energy signatures are unlike anything we've ever recorded. They suggest technology operating on principles we don't understand. Impossible, Elder Morgoth stated firmly. The humans were advanced for primitives, but they couldn't have developed anything beyond our understanding in just 1 century. Dr. Kethrall pulled up another file. I've been reviewing the old human research documents that were archived when they left. One name keeps appearing. Jung Tai-hyun, a human theoretical physicist. He published papers on something called reality, layering, and dimensional engineering shortly before humanity's withdrawal. We dismissed those papers as science fiction, Veltar recalled. Maybe we were wrong. Admiral Zorthak of the Council Defense Force stepped forward. The military commander was a practical being who dealt in facts, not theories. Regardless of the cause, we have a crisis. Entire sectors of the galaxy are vanishing. We need to investigate. Agreed, Veltar said. Admiral, prepare an expedition to investigate these voids. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Within a week, Admiral Zorthak had assembled a fleet of 12 ships, representing the best technology the Council possessed. The expedition included scientists from every major species, equipped with the most advanced sensors and weapons available. They chose to investigate the void where the Kepler sector had been, reasoning that it was the most recent disappearance and might provide the clearest evidence of what was happening. The journey to the Kepler coordinates took 5 days. As they approached, the ship's sensors began detecting increasingly strange readings. Space itself seemed to ripple around the void, as if reality was unstable in the area. Sensors are picking up dimensional distortions, reported Science Officer Velkix from the flagship. The readings are similar to theoretical models for folded spacetime. Folded spacetime is impossible, Admiral Zorthak replied. Space is space. It can't be folded. Tell that to our instruments, Velkix muttered. As the fleet reached the edge of the void, something extraordinary happened. For just a moment, their sensors penetrated whatever barrier separated normal space from the void's interior. What they saw defied every law of physics they knew. Inside the void wasn't emptiness. It was fullness beyond imagination. Entire star systems existed in layers, stacked on top of each other in dimensions that shouldn't exist. Worlds that somehow occupied the same space while being completely separate. Civilizations that had been expanded beyond anything possible in normal three-dimensional reality. "It's still there," whispered Navigator Kethnal. "The Kepler sector. But it's been improved, enhanced, made into something larger than it was." The vision lasted only seconds, before their sensors lost the ability to penetrate the dimensional barrier, but those seconds had shown them something that would haunt their dreams forever. Admiral Zorthak ordered the fleet to enter the void. What happened next was unclear. The flagship's final transmission was a confused jumble of scientific readings and crew reports that made no sense. Then, silence. 11 of the 12 ships never returned. The lone survivor limped back to Council space 3 weeks later. Its hull was undamaged, but its crew was in a state of shock that medical teams couldn't explain. They spoke in fragments about impossible geometries and worlds folded inside themselves. Most disturbing of all, the ship's computer had recorded a message that played automatically when the vessel reached Council space. The message was in perfect galactic standard, transmitted on all frequencies. "You chose isolation. We chose transcendence. The offer of partnership was genuine. Your rejection was noted and respected. We will not interfere with your chosen path." HRC. HRC? Veltar wondered aloud as he listened to the message for the 100th time. Dr. Kethrel had researched the abbreviation and found it in the old human diplomatic files. "Human Relations Council," she explained. "It was their department for dealing with alien species." "They're still out there," Admiral Zorthak realized. His military mind grasped the implications immediately. "They didn't disappear. They evolved, advanced, became something beyond our understanding." The surviving crew members of the expedition were debriefed extensively, but their reports were so bizarre that the Council initially dismissed them as trauma-induced hallucinations. "They showed us wonders," whispered Captain Nexville, the expedition's senior surviving officer. "Cities that existed in 7 dimensions. Beings who lived as pure consciousness, but could take physical form when needed. Technology that treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than rules." "What did they want from you?" Veltar asked. "Nothing," Captain Nexville replied, confusion clear in her voice. "They didn't want anything. They were just sad, disappointed. They kept saying they had hoped we would choose differently." "Choose differently about what?" "Partnership. They said they had offered partnership and we had chosen separation. They respected our choice, but they were sorry we had made it. As the weeks passed, more star systems vanished into perfect spherical voids. Each disappearance followed the same pattern. No destruction, no violence, just a gentle transition from normal space into something else entirely. The disappeared civilizations weren't dead. Refugee ships that had been near the void boundaries when the transitions occurred brought back stories of their homeworlds being gently relocated to improved versions of themselves. Entire populations found themselves on planets that were somehow better than the originals, with no memory of how they had gotten there. "They're saving everyone," Dr. Kethrel realized as she analyzed the refugee reports. "Every time a system disappears, its inhabitants are moved to enhanced versions of their worlds. No one is being harmed." "But they're not asking permission," Elder Morgoth pointed out grimly. "No," Dr. Kethrel agreed. "They're not asking. They're just doing what they think is best." The Council faced a terrible realization. Humanity hadn't disappeared from the galaxy. They had transcended it, becoming beings of such advanced capability that they could reshape reality itself, and they were systematically upgrading the entire galaxy according to their own vision of perfection. The only question was whether the Council would be included in that vision or left behind in their chosen isolation. The answer came soon enough. The discovery that changed everything came not from space, but from the ground beneath their feet. Archaeologist Nimbara was working on a routine excavation on the Architect homeworld when her team uncovered something that shouldn't exist. Deep beneath the ancient city of Veltharok, in chambers that predated known civilization by thousands of years. They found human artifacts. This makes no sense, Nimbara muttered as she carefully examined the objects her team had unearthed. According to our histories, humans first contacted galactic civilization only 160 years ago. These artifacts are carbon dated to over $3,000 years old. The artifacts were clearly human in origin. Tools designed for five-fingered hands, clothing sized for bipedal humanoid forms, and most disturbing of all, genetic samples preserved in crystalline containers that bore human DNA markers. But these weren't the most shocking discoveries. In the deepest chamber, Nimbara's team found what appeared to be instruction manuals written in ancient architect script, but describing technology that was unmistakably human in design. These texts described dimensional folding techniques, reported her assistant, Dr. Kelmaven. The same theoretical concepts that appeared in the human research files from a century ago. But these instructions are written in our oldest historical script, from before our species had developed space travel. Nimbara sent an urgent message to the council. Within days, similar archaeological teams were dispatched to every major homeworld in the galaxy. What they found challenged everything the council thought they knew about galactic history. On the Zephyrian crystal world, Keeper Thalami discovered vast libraries hidden deep within the planet's crystal core. The information was encoded in pure mathematical harmonics that only the most ancient Zephyrian elders could interpret. The songs speak of the gardeners, Thalami reported to the council via quantum communication. Beings who came from the stars in the time before memory. They taught our ancestors the mathematics of crystal growth, the harmonics of stellar engineering, the songs that bind energy to matter. The ancient Zephyrian texts described their mysterious teachers in detail: bipedal creatures with 5-digit extremities, bilateral symmetry, and an unusual ability to understand the mathematical patterns that governed reality itself. The descriptions match human physiology perfectly, Dr. Kethrall noted as she analyzed Thalami's reports. But they're describing events that happened millennia before humans supposedly developed space travel. On the Nethri homeworld, floating cities that had existed since the dawn of their civilization yielded similar revelations. Hidden in the gas giant's deepest atmospheric layers, explorers found massive structures that could only have been built by beings capable of surviving in hard vacuum. Dr. Whalen, a Nethri historian who specialized in pre-spaceflight civilizations, made the most disturbing discovery of all. In the ancient communication centers of their oldest cities, she found message logs that had been inactive for thousands of years. The logs contained conversations between our ancestors and beings they called the Watchers, she reported. The Watchers taught our people how to manipulate electromagnetic fields, how to build atmospheric processors, how to develop the technology that let us become a spacefaring species. The conversations were one-sided. Only the Nethri responses had been preserved. But the content made it clear that their mysterious teachers had been giving them specific instructions for technological development, guiding their evolution from a primitive gas world species to an advanced civilization. Most shocking of all, the final entry in the logs was a farewell message from the Nethri to their departed teachers. We understand. You must go now so that we may grow on our own. We will remember the Watchers always, though we know you will return when we are ready. Council xenobiologist Dr. Yextar was assigned to analyze the growing mountain of archaeological evidence. Her specialty was evolutionary biology, and what she found defied everything scientists thought they knew about how life developed. Every spacefaring species in the galaxy shares certain genetic modifications, she reported to an emergency council session. Genetic sequences that enhance intelligence, extend lifespan, and improve adaptation to space travel. These modifications are identical across all species despite our completely different evolutionary origins. She activated the chamber's display to show complex genetic maps. These modifications are artificial. They were deliberately introduced into our ancestral populations thousands of years ago. The modification patterns are the same for every species, implemented using the same techniques. What are you suggesting? Veltar asked, though his expression indicated he already suspected the answer. I'm suggesting that none of us evolved naturally into spacefaring civilizations. We were all guided, modified, taught, and prepared by the same source. Someone cultivated this entire galaxy to produce the civilizations that eventually formed the Council. The implications were staggering. Every major technological breakthrough in galactic history could be traced back to lost knowledge discovered in ancient ruins, or inspiration that had come to scientists in dreams, or accidental discoveries that had led to major advances. Director Holvex of the Galactic Archaeological Institute made the final, devastating discovery. On a dead world at the galaxy's edge, his team uncovered ruins that were older than any known civilization. The structures were massive, designed on a scale that dwarfed anything the current galaxy had ever built. This was a control center, Holvex reported as he transmitted images of the vast underground complex his team had discovered. A monitoring station that watched over the entire galaxy. The technology is so advanced that we can barely understand its basic functions. The control center contained star maps showing the positions of every inhabited world in the galaxy, with detailed files on each species' development. The files tracked genetic modifications, technological progress, social evolution, and readiness for space travel. Most disturbing of all, the files showed projected timelines for when each species would be ready to join a galactic community, and detailed plans for how that community should be structured. They planned all of this, Dr. Kethrall realized as she studied the ancient data. The entire galactic civilization. They guided our development for thousands of years, ensuring we would become spacefaring at roughly the same time and with compatible technologies. But the control center contained one more revelation that shook the Council to its core. In the deepest vault, Holvex's team found genetic samples and cultural records from the control center's builders. The builders were human, not ancient proto-humans or some related species, but modern humans with DNA identical to the humans who had left the Council a century ago. The genetic markers were precise matches for the samples in the human diplomatic files. "This is impossible," Elder Morgoth declared when presented with the evidence. "Humans are a young species. They couldn't have built galactic civilization. They barely achieved spaceflight 200 years ago." According to their own records, Dr. Kethrall replied quietly, "Humans achieved spaceflight over 5,000 years ago. They've been in this galaxy longer than any of us." The truth was undeniable, though it shattered everything the Council believed about themselves and their place in the galaxy. Humans hadn't been newcomers to galactic civilization. They had been its architects. For millennia, they had carefully guided the development of dozens of species, nurturing them toward space travel, teaching them compatible technologies, and preparing them for the day when they would meet each other and form a galactic community. When that day came, humans had revealed themselves openly, hoping their children were ready to accept them as partners rather than masters. Instead, the Council had seen them as threats to be contained and ultimately expelled. "They tried to join us as equals," Beltar realized, his voice heavy with growing understanding. "After thousands of years of secret guidance, they wanted to be part of the civilization they had created. And we rejected them," Dr. Kethrall added. "We told them they didn't belong. We made them leave." The galaxy's greatest gardeners had been asked to leave their own garden. As this realization sank in, the dimensional voids continued to spread throughout the galaxy. Each disappeared system was gently improved and relocated to humanity's transcendent realm. The humans were dismantling the galaxy they had created, taking their children with them to something better, but they were leaving the Council behind. The final message from the Void Zones made their intentions clear. "We offered partnership. You chose hierarchy. We offered cooperation. You chose exclusion. We respected your decision then. We respect it now. Goodbye." The Council realized they weren't being conquered or destroyed. They were being abandoned by the very beings who had made their existence possible in the first place. The galaxy's children were going home, leaving their ungrateful siblings alone with their chosen isolation. The dimensional voids had consumed 2/3 of the galaxy when the Council finally witnessed the truth with their own eyes. Dr. Kethrall had spent months modifying their most advanced sensors, trying to penetrate the barriers that separated normal space from the void zones. Her breakthrough came when she realized the barriers weren't walls, they were filters, designed to keep three-dimensional beings from perceiving higher-dimensional structures. "I've found a way to adjust our sensors to detect higher-dimensional objects," she announced to the emergency council session. "We can finally see what's inside the voids." The main chamber's display screen flickered to life, showing sensor readings from the nearest void zone. At first, the display showed only empty space. Then Dr. Kethrel activated her modifications. The chamber fell silent as impossible structures appeared on the screen. Where the sensors had detected empty space, there were now vast cities that existed in dimensions the Council couldn't fully understand. Buildings that somehow occupied the same space while being completely separate. Transportation networks that moved through folded reality, allowing instant travel between distant points. "Those are star systems," whispered Veltar, his four eyes struggling to process what he was seeing. "But they're layered. Multiple star systems existing in the same space." 11 dimensions, Dr. Kethrel confirmed, reading the sensor data. Each void zone contains the original star systems, but expanded into higher dimensional space. The same physical area now houses thousands of times more space for civilizations to grow. Engineer Vazikol leaned forward, his technical mind trying to grasp the implications. "The engineering required for this is beyond theoretical. They're manipulating the fundamental structure of space-time itself." "Not manipulating," Dr. Kethrel corrected. "Improving. They're taking normal three-dimensional space and expanding it into higher dimensions, creating more room for life to flourish while keeping the same physical coordinates." As the Council watched, the sensors detected massive structures moving through the dimensional layers. At first they appeared to be ships, but as the resolution improved, it became clear they were something far more remarkable. "Those are beings," Dr. Kethrel realized. "Individual humans, but they exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. They can be physical matter when they need to interact with normal space, but they can also exist as pure consciousness, pure energy, pure information." The humans had transcended the limitations of biological existence while retaining their essential humanity. They moved through their enhanced reality like living gods, but gods who use their power to nurture and improve rather than rule and command. Throughout the displayed void zones, the sensors detected refugee populations from the disappeared systems. But these weren't refugees in any traditional sense. They were living in improved versions of their homeworlds, with enhanced technologies and expanded living space. "They're not being conquered," Engineer Vazikol observed. "They're being adopted, raised to a higher level of existence." Every species that had been relocated to the void zones was thriving beyond anything they had achieved in normal space. Their lifespans had been extended, their technologies had been enhanced, and they had been given access to dimensional spaces that provided unlimited room for growth and exploration. "This is what they offered us," Veltar realized with growing horror. "Partnership in this transcendent existence, and we told them to leave." The Council's scientists worked frantically to understand how the dimensional expansion was achieved. The mathematics involved were so complex that even the Zephyrians, the galaxy's greatest mathematicians, could barely comprehend the basic principles. "The energy requirements should be impossible," Dr. Kethrel reported after weeks of analysis. "To fold space-time on this scale would require more power than entire star systems can generate." "Unless," Engineer Vazikol suggested quietly, "they're not using external power sources. What if they've learned to manipulate the fundamental forces directly?" The implications were staggering. The humans had apparently mastered reality itself, gaining the ability to modify physical laws, expand dimensions, and create spaces that existed outside normal physics. As the Council struggled to understand what they were witnessing, refugee fleets continued to arrive from the edges of the expanding void zones. Each group brought the same story. Their worlds had been gently relocated moments before the dimensional transition, moved to improved versions of their original homes. Captain Yelthar of the refugee ship Last Hope described what had happened to his system. "One moment we were dealing with the usual problems: overcrowding, resource shortages, environmental damage. The next moment, we found ourselves on a planet that was somehow the same, but better. More space, cleaner environment, unlimited resources. And the humans, they were there to welcome us. What did they say? Veltar asked. They apologized. Captain Yelthar replied, confusion clear in his voice. They said they were sorry it had taken so long to bring us home. They explained that they had wanted to wait for everyone to be ready, but time was running out. Time running out for what? They didn't say exactly, but they seemed to think that something was forcing them to accelerate their plans. Something about decisions that had been made that couldn't be changed. Dr. Kethral suspected she knew what the humans meant. As more systems were relocated to the dimensional voids, the energy patterns throughout the galaxy were shifting. The fundamental structure of spacetime was being altered on such a massive scale that it was becoming impossible to maintain both the enhanced reality and normal space in the same region. They're having to choose, she explained to the council. They can either leave things as they are and limit the improvements they can make, or they can complete the transformation and move everything to enhanced dimensional space. Everything except us, Elder Morgeth noted grimly. The Council's territory remained untouched by the dimensional voids. Their star systems continued to exist in normal three-dimensional space, while the rest of the galaxy transformed around them. It was becoming clear that this wasn't an oversight. The humans were deliberately leaving the Council behind. Final confirmation came when a message appeared simultaneously on every Council communication device throughout their remaining territory. The message was simple, written in perfect translations for each species. We offered partnership. You chose hierarchy. We offered cooperation. You chose exclusion. We offered transcendence. You chose limitation. Your choices are respected. Your isolation is granted. Farewell. The message was signed with the names of the 4 humans who had left the council chambers a century ago. Kim Daeho, Park Mira, Lee Junho, and Yoon Sora. They remember us, Veltar whispered as he read the message for the 100th time. After all these years, after becoming beings of virtually unlimited power, they still remember the moment we asked them to leave. Chancellor Mordeep, who had recently been elected to lead the council's response to the crisis, made a desperate decision. He assembled a delegation to travel to the edge of human space, hoping to negotiate some kind of reconciliation. We can admit we were wrong, he argued to the council. We can ask to be included in their transformation. Surely they wouldn't refuse to help us. The delegation consisted of representatives from every remaining council species. They traveled to the coordinates where Sul had once existed, now marked by a massive dimensional void that pulsed with unimaginable energies. As their ships approached the void's edge, something unexpected happened. The barrier that normally prevented three-dimensional beings from perceiving the enhanced reality became permeable, allowing them to see inside. What they saw destroyed any remaining hope of simple reconciliation. The void contained not just the Al-Bial, Sol system, but the entire galactic core transformed into a multidimensional paradise that housed trillions of beings across infinite layers of existence. The humans had become the architects of a reality so beautiful and complex that it defied description. And standing at the edge of that paradise, waiting for the council delegation, were 4 familiar figures: Kim Daeho, Park Mira, Lee Junho, and Yoon Sora appeared exactly as they had a century ago, though their forms seemed to flicker between physical matter and pure light. They had transcended biological existence but had chosen to present themselves in familiar forms for this final meeting. You have come to ask for inclusion, Kim Daeho said, his voice somehow reaching the council ships across the vacuum of space. But inclusion was offered long ago. What you rejected then you cannot simply reclaim now. We were wrong, Chancellor Mordeep replied through the ship's communication system. We understand that now. Please, let us join you in this transcendent existence. Park Mira stepped forward, her expression sad but resolute. You do not understand. Transcendence cannot be given. It must be chosen. You had the opportunity to choose it freely, to grow alongside us as partners. Instead, you chose separation. We Choose differently now, Chancellor Mordeep insisted. Now you choose out of fear and desperation, Li Junho observed. Not out of understanding or genuine desire for partnership. That is not transcendence. That is simply escape from consequences. Yoon. Sora was the last to speak, and her words carried the weight of final judgment. The final transformation happened on a Tuesday. Chancellor Mordeep was in his office reviewing supply reports when every star in the sky began to fade. Not dying or exploding, simply becoming dimmer, as if they were moving away at impossible speeds. He rushed to the observation deck of the council station and watched in horrified fascination as the galaxy around them underwent its final metamorphosis. The remaining star systems, the ones that had held refugees and observers like himself, began to shimmer and fade like mirages in a desert. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Velnax, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We're receiving final evacuation notices from all remaining systems. The inhabitants are being relocated to elsewhere." "Where is elsewhere?" Mordeep demanded. "The messages don't specify. They just say to a better place with gratitude for your patience." Through the observation deck's massive windows, Mordeep watched the last of the galaxy disappear. Entire star clusters folded in on themselves, not destroyed but transformed into something that existed beyond normal perception. The brilliant spiral arms of the Milky Way vanished one by one, leaving behind only empty space and scattered points of light. Within hours, the transformation was complete. Where a galaxy of 400 billion stars had once existed, there was now mostly darkness. Only a few dozen star systems remained, scattered across the vast emptiness like lonely islands in an infinite ocean. The Council's territory had been preserved exactly as it was, unchanged and untransformed. They had their isolation at last. Dr. Kethral's final report made the situation devastatingly clear. We are alone. The galaxy as we knew it no longer exists in normal space. Everything has been relocated to dimensional layers we cannot access. How many systems remain? Veltar asked. 47 star systems total. All of them Council territory. Population, approximately 2 billion beings across all species. Dr. Kethral paused, checking her calculations. Before the transformation, the galaxy housed over 1 trillion beings. They're all still alive, but they exist in a reality we chose not to join. The Council faced the ultimate irony. They had gotten exactly what they demanded. Complete independence from human influence, total control over their own destiny, and absolute isolation from any external interference. They had never felt so small. Engineer Vazkol attempted to analyze the energy signatures left behind by the transformation. What he discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The entire galaxy still exists, he reported, but it's been folded into dimensions we can't perceive. From our perspective, it's gone. From their perspective, we're the ones who disappeared. Can we communicate with them? Chancellor Mordeep asked desperately. No. The dimensional barriers are complete. We exist in separate realities now. The psychological impact on the Council species was immediate and severe. For the first time in their history, they faced the reality of true isolation. No trade with distant systems, no cultural exchange with other civilizations, no sense of being part of something greater than themselves. Worse, they began to understand what they had lost. Refugee ships from the final evacuation brought stories of the wonders they had glimpsed in those last moments before relocation. Entire civilizations had been gently lifted from normal space and placed in dimensional paradises where resources were unlimited, lifespans were extended, and consciousness itself could be expanded beyond biological limitations. They showed us previews, reported Captain Nelvaran, whose ship had been among the last to witness the transformation. Glimpses of what existence could be like in their enhanced reality. Worlds where beings could experience 11 dimensions simultaneously, where travel between star systems took seconds instead of years, where death itself was optional. Did they ask you to join them? Veltar inquired. They asked everyone except us, Captain Nelvaran replied sadly. Every other species was invited to choose, remain in normal space with the Council, or join the transcendent reality. Everyone chose transcendence. Everyone? Everyone. Even the most conservative species, the ones who had always been afraid of change. When they saw what was being offered, they all chose to evolve rather than stagnate. The Council members sat in stunned silence. They were not just isolated. They were the only beings in the known galaxy who had been deemed unready for transcendence. Dr. Kethral spent weeks analyzing the dimensional barriers that separated them from the transformed galaxy. Her findings offered little hope. The barriers aren't locks, she explained. They're filters. They're designed to prevent beings who haven't achieved a certain level of consciousness from perceiving higher dimensional reality. So we're trapped? Elder Morgeth asked. Not trapped. Protected. The humans created these barriers to prevent us from accidentally damaging ourselves by attempting to access realities we're not prepared for. Protected, Veltar repeated bitterly, like children being kept away from adult activities. That analogy proved more accurate than they had realized. As the months passed, it became clear that the humans were still watching over them. Supply ships would occasionally appear from nowhere, bringing resources that the Council's isolated systems desperately needed. Medical assistance would arrive precisely when populations faced health crises they couldn't handle alone. The aid always came with the same message: from your elder siblings with love and patience. Elder siblings. The Council finally understood their true relationship to humanity. They weren't equals who had rejected partnership. They were children who had rejected their parents' guidance, and now they were being left alone to learn and grow at their own pace. They're waiting for us to mature, Dr. Kethral realized during one of the Council's increasingly desperate planning sessions. They're not punishing us, they're giving us time to develop the wisdom we need for transcendence. How long do we have? Chancellor Mordeep asked. As long as we need. The humans exist outside normal time now. 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years makes no difference to them. They'll wait until we're ready. But ready for what? The Council's attempts to develop transcendent technology on their own had failed completely. Without access to the mathematical principles that governed higher dimensional reality, they couldn't even begin to understand how the transformation had been achieved. Their isolation forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Without the constant stimulation of trade and cultural exchange with other species, the Council's stagnant bureaucracy became even more inefficient. Technology advancement slowed to a crawl. Social progress halted entirely. We're dying, Veltar observed during a particularly grim council session. Not physically, but culturally, intellectually, spiritually. We're becoming exactly what the humans feared we would become: a closed system that consumes itself. The younger generation was hit hardest. Beings who had grown up expecting to join a vast galactic civilization found themselves trapped in a tiny cluster of isolated worlds. Many fell into despair. Others turned to radical philosophies that blamed the humans for their situation. But a few began to ask different questions. Thalwyn, the young Zephyrian scholar who had first discovered the human research files, became the leader of a new movement. Maybe, he suggested during a gathering of young beings from all Council species, the problem isn't that the humans left us behind. Maybe the problem is that we're still thinking like the beings who drove them away. What do you mean? Asked Yexalima, a young Nethri philosopher. We're still approaching this as a hierarchy, Thalwyn explained. We want the humans to come back and give us transcendence as a reward for admitting we were wrong. But that's not how it works. Transcendence isn't something that can be given. It has to be earned through genuine growth. The young movement began studying the human research files that had been dismissed for so long. Working together across species lines, they slowly began to understand the principles behind dimensional engineering and consciousness expansion. It's not about technology, Yexalima discovered after months of research. The technology is just a tool. The real transformation is psychological, philosophical, spiritual. You have to genuinely care about others more than yourself. You have to see cooperation as more valuable than control. The humans tried to teach us that a century ago, added Corfell, a young architect who had joined the movement. But we were too proud to listen. The movement grew slowly, facing resistance from the older generation who clung to traditional power structures. But as the decades passed, more and more young beings began to embrace the principles of cooperation, growth, and genuine concern for others' well-being. They didn't know if they would ever achieve transcendence. The mathematics involved were still beyond their understanding, and they had no guarantee that their efforts would succeed. But for the first time since the humans had left, they were growing instead of stagnating. Somewhere in the higher dimensions, 4 familiar figures watched the slowly changing consciousness of the council species with quiet satisfaction. "They're learning," Park Mira observed as she tended to a garden that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. "Slowly," Kim Daeho agreed. "But genuinely. This time the change is coming from within." Lee Junho nodded as he reviewed the progress reports that arrived from across the multidimensional galaxy.